I think like I've got my own little theory about what this movie is actually saying and what it relates to, and I don't think you can tell that story, have that subtext without casting a 36-year-old David Bowie sort of, who's got that beautiful fucking statuesque look that he has, a beautiful man, but he's just hit that right age where there's a weariness behind the eyes. And it's so perfect for a vampire story because he's seen some shit by 36. He's had it all and he's seen some shit and he has that world-weary demeanor. I love the delivery of his lines, even when he's behind that ridiculous makeup. I think he's perfect. I think he's pitch perfect casting for me.
Funny thing is, I'm actually not a David Bowie music fan, and I'm usually not a big fan of him in movies. Like, even though The Prestige is one of my favorite movies, I think he's actually terribly cast in that. I think he does a shit job as like fucking Tesla, whoever it is he plays. Like, I thought that was like one of the worst parts of the movie. But I actually think in this movie, I agree, he did a very good job. Like, to me, first of all, one of the things I'm not a big fan about him in general is I thought he always looked a bit weird, but he actually is perfect casting in this sense. As this sort of, remember in his scenario, they imply he was some sort of like French noble or something, and now he's like living out life as like a sort of yuppie in New York or something. First of all, he looks perfect for that. Like he has the anorexic sort of gaunt look. And then also I agree, the way he actually delivers his lines is mega. I think he actually adds a lot of like gravitas to the role. And the key thing to me is this, if you've never watched the film, obviously I'm rewatching it now, so I can't remember what it was like 25 years ago, whatever, when I saw it. But if you've watched it for the first time, since you're going to know, wait a minute, that's David Bowie. Is he the main guy in this movie? You're never going to think any of the things in the plot play out the way they do for the first hour. You're going to assume, right, he's going to get like healed by the Susan Sarandon woman, or she's going to be his love interest. They even try to imply that initially. You're going to think it's about him. So it's actually a good red herring as well. Like when it goes halfway through and he goes really old, there's no way you're going to think that it's going to end the way it does and what happens to his character is. Like, you're going to think, well, why would he be the main character in the movie? And by the way, this is going to be a recurring theme with me. I just think practical effects kick the shit out of CGI. Like, maybe when he's really old, it doesn't look that good, but that's about the hardest effect to do. When he's getting older, they actually did that really well.
Looks better than fucking Guy Pearce in Prometheus, though.
Looked good. Actually looked legit.
I mean, I think like, okay. I disagree with the Bowie is necessary to this film take. I think that Bowie is completely extraneous to this movie because he doesn't end up, he's not even in half the movie, right? And in a way, I find it jarring because it's so fucking obviously David Bowie that it does rather break me out of the sense of immersion in this film. And there's many other actors that could do just as good of a job as David Bowie because he actually doesn't even act much in this film. And even when he is acting, half the time he's covered in this old age makeup, which is very well done, by the way. I think the makeup is amazing in this film to age him. But it's like the whole purpose of David Bowie was to have him on without makeup at the beginning and then to slowly obscure the fact that he's David Bowie. And he's not, an amazing character actor. I like him in Labyrinth. I think that is a great part for David Bowie. But overall, I found his participation to be more, it took me out of the film because he was there more than I got into it. I wish this had been an actor who really disappeared into the role as opposed to being in your face fucking David Bowie.
I even thought his voice was pretty good for it. Like, I actually think that sort of almost like upper class sounding English accent sounded awesome for that character. And I actually thought, like I said, to me, he added a gravitas to the movie. Like, I thought the scenes with him and the kid before he kills that kid was fucking awesome. Like, the sort of like reservedness, and you could tell he's weighing up, like, should I do something, should I not? I thought it was very well done.
I think other actors could achieve the same or better performance, is my point.
I think the thing with David Bowie is like when you cast David Bowie, there's a specific type of film you can put him in where he's good, and it has to be when we're dealing with the otherworldly, the almost ethereal quality. You look at the roles where like that he's famous for, probably. The Man Who Fell to Earth is another good example of the type of movie you would cast him in. He has to play an alien that sort of has a vaguely human form, but really can't fit in. And that's what he does brilliantly. And this is why I think he is amazing, in this. He was in Twin Peaks as well. I think he was in the series and Fire Walk with Me. and perfect for something that strange. And so that's why you cast Bowie. And this is what I mean about, like, I get it. I mean, you could put, like, sure, you could definitely switch him out and have another actor there, but then I think the movie loses some of what it's trying to achieve in doing so. Like, I would imagine, and I couldn't find anything about this when I was researching for this episode, but I imagine that Tony Scott, when he was doing the adaptation from the novel, was I would imagine pretty quickly he had David Bowie in mind for this. It is a part that, even though the story doesn't unfold in a way you might expect, it is a part that feels almost tailor-made for David Bowie. There's like a David Bowie shaped hole in this film, and they just slot him in, and it's perfect, I think.
And by the way, on the other point of some of the other people, I actually think Susan Sarandon's the weakest part of the movie. I thought Catherine Deneuve was fucking awesome. Again,
Yeah, she's
great
great.
casting for that role of like some sort of almost like a regal figure from the past who's the ultimate vampire. And as a femme fatale, she fucking nails it, 10 out of 10. Like, the lighting's awesome on her, the makeup, she has the look. Like, what I love about her character is she has the air of that sort of a character. Like, she's not like some overly smiley effect. She's like, it's got a very staid look, but then there's like the hint of more mystery behind it. I thought she did a great job.
Well, it's perfect casting again, because it's, you bring in a French, actress that has done a lot of French cinema through the 60s and 70s, but wouldn't be particularly well known to American audiences at the time. And sort of, you drop her in this film where she literally has to play an ancient person out of time, right? Because again, she dates back to Egypt. She has that same otherworldly quality in this movie. She's almost too perfect, too beautiful, she's
really good looking in this movie as well.
Yeah, and so that seductive element of what it is about and keep in mind, key to this is the vampire trick of seduction.
Yes.
It comes through the screen. It exudes.
I've always thought, like, we'll get to this on some of the other movies in this series, but I've always thought that's an underrated aspect that people don't talk about in the genre. It's not just that a vampire has supernatural powers and wants to kill you. It's the idea if they get you one-on-one and you're not like of a certain type of mind or religious faith, they can just overpower you hypnotically, and it becomes like a predator-prey thing. If people don't know that famous concept, there's supposedly a thing that's actually regular. It's not just some shit from poetry, that like a second before, like a hawk grabs like a rabbit, they have sort of like a moment they look at each other and essentially like the prey sort of goes limp because it knows it's going to die, and the predator just goes in for the kill. And there's sort of like a moment in that second where they sort of connect and understand this is the way of things. Like, that element is always the underlying aspect of the vampire movie. I mean, there's one when we talk about Fright Night, for example. This is a classic example of it. Like, the idea is that's also what's terrifying, is that if they actually do get you one-on-one, they'll make you want to die. They'll make you want to be the victim of the vampire. I've always thought that's a psychologically mega potent force.
Yeah.
I think much of the work of acting in Catherine Deneuve's part is done by the direction, cinematography, and lighting, and that she doesn't even have to be fantastic for this movie to work. I think very little is asked of her from an acting perspective, and she's fine, but I think the role is just not terribly hard, honestly. And I do agree with the take that Susan Sarandon is kind of a weak point in this movie, because she's a little too kind of neurotic. And if anything, I find her presence rather jarring with the tone and aesthetic of the entire film. I think she could say less in this movie. I think there could be, this is maybe a weird take for some people, I think there could be even less dialogue in this movie.
For sure.
She talks too much, if anything. And her more...
Well, you could actually make this movie, no joke, a movie with no dialogue, but just music and just visuals, and it would work, literally. You could do the whole same movie. You'd never need to talk. Like, that's the other thing about how they did it.
But also, I think we have to acknowledge that the only person who is really required to act in this film was Susan Sarandon. Everything else is just hard carried by the direction, effectively.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, as I said, I think Susan Sarandon is kind of forgettable, but I understand the casting choice, because it is about aesthetic. Obviously, Sarandon was coming off, she was everyone's secret crush from Rocky Horror Picture Show.
The parallels between this and Rocky Horror Picture Show are fucking hilarious.
Her scientific colleague, what's his name? Rufus someone, the actor, he was the scientist. He was a dancer in Rocky Horror Picture Show. He was one of the one of the Transylvanians as well.
Ah, okay.
In the background, like just a background part. But yeah, so I mean, you know, you could. This is the unofficial sequel to Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Why does Susan Sarandon just cheat on everybody in all of these movies?
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Right?
The queen of infidelity.
I mean, the problem with the movie, just to lean into a little bit of critique for me, is probably the pacing. That's where I feel that the beginning is so visceral, and then you're in, and I love the slow meditative. It's almost excruciating. A mirror of what it would be like to live in an unsatisfied eternity. But then, literally, it is like 12 minutes before the end. We ramp up, and Sarandon's
so
a vampire.
Bad.
And, Sarandon's a vampire, and then Sarandon doesn't want to be a vampire, and then Sarandon is dead, I think, and then and they're all bleeding, and then Catherine Deneuve is upset, and then they all come back from the dead, and it's like.
Well, I don't get it. Why did they need that last act? To me, the movie ends like this. You put Boy into the casket, which implies what happens to them all, because you see the other caskets. She has, take care of him, and then you see her get to know a vampire, and then that's the end of the movie. To me, it's
end of the movie.
Yeah, because it's the cycle.
You don't need any wrap up to you.
It's the cycle of the inevitability of that existential horror. Right, that is interesting about this movie. You can fucking miss me with the ridiculous mummy attack that happens at the end. Give me a fucking break.
It is Tales from the Crypt. That's what I mean. It's cringe, like such a beautiful film. Yeah, it's such a really nice, beautiful piece of cinema, and then it's just Tales from the Crypt. Like, here you go. The mummy's back.
Well, it's also it doesn't even line up with anything, because these are when they're in their prime as vampires, right? They're supposed to be strong. Vampires are supposed to be supernaturally strong, and because they need to be able to overpower their prey, right? And it's just so ridiculous to see Catherine Deneuve just be overrun by these shambling mummy corpses. And it really just stretches credulity when what we've seen from the entire movie has been this sense of sexy power from her, and then all of a sudden she's just screaming, "Oh no, my former lovers are mummies and they're attacking me right now." It's ridiculous, and it's just bad. It's just a bad way to end this movie, because even though, as we stated earlier, it does end up with Susan Sarandon basically forcing her to drink Susan Sarandon's blood, which then weakens her to the point where she can be killed. That destroys all of her former lovers. And then the final shot is Susan Sarandon in London now instead of New York with her little, special lovers. And so the idea is the cycle continues, right? And at the end, the end is just so bad, because then it's Catherine Deneuve in the coffin. Yeah, what's Sarah, I think, is the character's name, Susan Sarandon's name, and she's just yelling Sarah from her own wooden box. I'm like, come on, we don't need this. The concept was already drilled in, and it was much more interesting before you explained all this shit or tried to recreate the cycle.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or be a pleb and don't.